Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Lore You Know. Today we're talking about the Hornsaw Forest, Part 2. We're generically calling it Factions of the Hornsaw.
Factions of the ones. Because, well, based on all the research I did, that's what it looks like.
Gangs of the Hornsaw might be
Right?
better.
Starring
People.
Leonardo DiCaprio. Wait,
No. Okay.
Wait,
Well, I
what?
mean, he's okay. No.
We're gonna have to make a whoopsie daisy joke at some point.
Yeah, and I will try to say Hornsaw and not name the city of the necromancers.
right.
Because I keep
Just,
doing that.
H's,
Saying the
and
wrong
they
word.
are right next to each
H's.
other.
Yeah.
Before
H's,
we get
M's,
started-
and G's. Yeah.
Right? Before we get started, we will throw out there that the Dead Man's Rust Kickstarter is currently going on over on, well, obviously Kickstarter. It is a mega campaign for the Scarred Lands setting. I am going to throw the link into chat. Boom, there you go. It's perfect because the Hornsaw is a large part of this campaign. Is that correct, Fran, who worked on it?
That is correct, Jeremy. Who
Backed it?
backed it? Yes,
Yeah.
there we go. Yeah, we're professionals.
So speaking of Fran, welcome and thank you for joining us again today to talk about this area, because obviously you worked on it for the upcoming book and you can maybe throw in some little gems for us. I don't know.
I'll do my best. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to throw out there as part of the Kickstarter as well, Fran and I, or mostly Fran, will be running a Twitch game, an actual, whatever you call it, on Sunday the 20th
Nice.
at noon Pacific, so 3 p.m. Eastern, on the Onyx Path channel.
Nice.
So going to be running a game that takes place in next week's episode.
Yeah.
The Gleaming Valley.
And if
I
you
want to look on
if
the
you
city.
haven't backed it, or if you have backed it and haven't looked at this yet, they sent out a preview of 2 of the chapters. One was talking about the Hornsaw, and one was essentially the monster, like appendix. So if you missed it, I got to be a part of a mate grinder earlier this week.
Oh,
Where
yeah.
we fought a bunch of these things. These things are horrifying. I cannot wait to get this book.
Oh, it's terrifying. I mean,
Yeah. I missed that stream because I had a work thing. So
gotcha.
I have a day job sometimes that I do.
These things happen. No one blames you. No one blames you.
I had to go do that Tuesday morning. But yeah,
So
that sounded like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a hoot. So the Hornsaw.
Hornsaw.
Part 2.
Part 2. So last time we talked about the history, and we talked a little bit about the elves and the dwarves and like the good guys.
Yeah.
This time we're mostly going to talk about the bad guys. Something and what I did was they released chapter, I guess it was chapter 3, as a pre-release thing for Rust, and I went over that and compared it with the chapter I was planning to talk about anyway today, for the Hornsaw, which corresponds with like about 2 chapters in the Hornsaw book. Forest of Blood? Is that the full title? Something like that. So
it's not a Scarred Lands title if it doesn't have blood in it.
Blood in it, yes, yeah. And so I've prepared sort of a comparison and contrast of the 2 things, saying this is what they're saying in the new stuff.
Nice.
Although I'm not going to go into everything because back the book if you want to see everything.
Yeah.
And how it compares to the old stuff, and maybe some of the areas that the old stuff goes in a little bit more detail, or maybe contradicts a little bit. Although 2 things to point out ahead of time: it doesn't contradict very much, which I think is a good thing. Mostly it just builds on it, which I think is a really good thing. And but there's one thing that struck me, and maybe it's because I have the artwork for the old book, because there's no art yet for Rust. There is art, but it wasn't in line or anything, and they're still making more. And the art is pretty horrific, but there's something grimmer about the writing in the old book that I noticed. It feels stickier, bloodier, nastier, and the new book, despite it being in a really grim place, feels more optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, some of the art for the new one, such as this Hornsaw impaling a manticora, is still pretty grim.
Oh, it's still very grim. Very, very
Yeah,
grim.
the idea that we're sending frickin' 1st to 3rd level characters into the Hornsaw is just kind of like, wow.
exactly.
Yeah, Travis came up with this, didn't? Yeah,
But
Travis.
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
feels it felt to me that while they're both grim and both, the new book feels more bright. Like there's a bright spot. Like if that makes sense, it's just something about the writing just makes it feel. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way I read it, and maybe it has something to do with the art. I don't know, but it just felt like the new book feels more positive. And part of it is also correcting some problematic issues that the old book had, which we'll get into, which is very not as problematic as it could be, but just interesting there. So I just wanted to preface with that kind of discovery I made as I was doing all this reading and research, or rereading, because I had read this book before. It just had been about a decade.
Yeah, this is not all of this information did come out
20 years ago. Well, 17 years ago.
2003, I think this book, the Hornsaw, something like that.
So not new. But
not
Rust
new at all.
refreshes it and adds a whole bunch of new stuff. So there we go. So any comments before I just dive into the first faction?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Okay. These are in order, roughly how they show up in the Rust chapter, but which also coincided with the order they are in the Hornsaw book. So that was helpful. But the Hornsaw book splits them up. They have a chapter on locations and then a chapter on the factions. I just sort of mushed it together. So starting off with kind of close to the middle of the forest, one of the more key locations and the key factions is the Cult of the Serpent Ascendant. And the location is the Crimson Temple.
Fun guys.
These guys, one you'll find amongst the various factions of the bad guys in the Hornsaw, they tend to be of a handful of different races, species, Titan spawn. One of the major ones we talked about several episodes ago is the Gorgons. They were the way back before the war. Mormo had transformed a lot of Yuan-Ti into these Gorgon creatures they look human, but they've got like belly snakes or they've got these weird. Those are the high Gorgons. They can pass for human, although except they're bald. So if they really want to pass for human, they have to wear shitty wigs.
Yeah.
And then they have.
I have alopecia.
Yeah.
In the art for the new book, there's a Gorgon standing with a couple of Asathi, and the adventurers are obviously up there in the background, trying to not be seen, probably because they're level 2 or something.
I love this. This is like, I love this new Gorgon art particularly. It's
nice.
And there are, because the old art, almost all the Gorgons were described as male, and there are plenty of female Gorgons, and there are female Gorgons in the books, but they're not Gorgons in the sense of Medusa. They differentiate that completely. There are Medusa in the Scarred Lands. They're snake-headed, mostly women. I don't know if there's any male Medusa. The Gorgons are related, but a unique species, although siblings to the low Gorgons, which are the weird lion-like with the snake manes. So the major players in the Hornsaw villainy would be the high Gorgons. And the leader of the Cult of the Serpent Ascendant is Lycir, who shows up in the Wise and the Wicked. So if you get the 5th edition version of that, he's got a whole spread. And he's creepy as all get out. And what's funky about the Crimson Temple is this is where Mormo died, basically. Not died, because she's not technically dead.
Where she's splattered.
Right.
where she was cut up into tiny bits.
Right, yeah. So just in case anyone didn't know, like, you can't kill a Titan. All of the dead Titans are technically still alive, even though they're dismembered and spread all over the place.
So this is where she was dismembered, mostly by Vangal, after Denev ripped her heart out. Oh, and probably the best in the old lore description of her death was in the Serpent Amphora module, the Serpent in the Fold. At the beginning of the Serpent in the Fold, there's a 3-page description from a point of view character, this elf who was there, and it's just really. This is like the best description I'd say of Mormo's defeat in any of the old books. So this is where she died, and they were like, this is where kind of the the center of her powers. It's not quite in the center of the Hornsaw, but it's close to the center of the Hornsaw. It's just to the east of the center of the Hornsaw. And they built this, there's basically this hill that the battle took place. And under this hill, they built this temple with the secret doors that are guarded by tons of snakes. And there's going to be a snake theme all day, by the way. Today, it's all snakes all the time. Mormo. Oh, I should have thrown in that story. Back in the day when I ran the Super Nymphora module, there was a wizard in the party briefly, and or a druid, wizard, something. I don't know, druid, a wizard, and she had a familiar who happened to be a viper, because it's a common familiar in 3-5 days.
And so when we started getting close to the Hornsaw, the little box that she kept it in, she had to tie down the lid because it kept trying to get out. And so there was this recurring joke of Mormo.
Yeah, because
Mormo. This, tapping noise from inside the box as the snake is like, no, got to get to mom, got to.
Basically, the familiar blew its will save and became basically driven by Mormo and wanted to leave its master and go, or their master, and go be in the Hornsaw with the other snakes. And so there was this recurring joke of like,
it's just hilarious how much the Scarred Lands, for all that it's terrifying and grim and everything, lends itself to comedy.
Dark.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Dark comedy. I will say. Grim humor. So anyway, Lysair, originally the temple was, who founded? I don't really have the history here. Center of Mormon worship. They built this temple inside of it, and have found like bits of Mormo there, and there's a kind of pit there where they just put it all. And I think this is the place with they've got a bunch of Mormo parts, and it's considered sacred to pretty much all of her followers. They're kind of neutral, and that the other factions do kind of pilgrimage here, because it's such a sacred ground to them. But they're only kind of neutral, and they have major issues with a couple of the factions, including probably there's 3 major factions, I'd say, amongst the Mormo followers: the Cult of the Serpent Ascendant, the Dar Alanat, and the Torn Womb. The Cult of the Serpent Ascendant is the most neutral to the other 2, but only just. And they have major issues with the Dar Alanat in particular. But followers of the Dar Alanat will come here and be like, ooh, temple, awesome. But it's just creepy. And it honestly reminded me of like Thulsa Doon from the Conan movies. Of like, just overarching snake creepiness with giant snakes and bubbling vats of human parts, and is everything horrible. And that scene in Conan is a good flavor for this temple, which is what, like, if you want inspiration, I mean, it doesn't look like it exactly by any means, but if you want an inspiration, that would be a good movie to watch if you're gonna do this bit. Would be the original Conan, because it's just got that whole thing. And on top of the hill above the temple is a plinth that says, "Upon this hill fell the ineffable mother," which is just so Mormo follower kind of vibe. So, and the cult is about 1,000 members in that main cult, led by High Gorgon Lysair. Mostly an interesting differentiation between the old lore and the new lore. The old lore, because of this division between them and the Dar Alanat in particular, it's all led by men. Male High Gorgons, male Asathi. There's women amongst the ranks and file, but it's just pretty much men in the leadership. And that's, I think a lot of it is the backlash with the Dar Alanat, who are all women in the leadership. Men in their rank and file, but no men in the leadership. So I think it's because of that. But in the new lore, in Rust, they did introduce a female kind of lieutenant to Lysair, Asath, Maleficent. So that contradicts that a little bit, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So it kind of, I think Lysair is probably still a bit sexist, but there's that. So that was one of the differences I did see. Moving on. Faction 2, as I mentioned, the Dar el-Anat. I love these guys. These are the central villains in the Serpent Amphora cycle thing, and a villain in the second half of our novel, Vigilant, although a kind of an unseen, creepy, overarching villain. You don't actually encounter you don't encounter their leaders directly in the book. Spoilers. They're led by the Blood Crone, who's flippin' amazing. And they are in the dead center of the Hornsaw Forest. So every forest in Gelspad has what they call a father tree or grandfather tree. There's like a big one in the middle of the Ganges where the elven cities are. And this was the center of the elven community in the Broadreach before the shit went down. Mormo's Yuk, this old grandfather tree was sort of built in a low depression. So it didn't tower over the forest the way some of these other grandfather trees do. And so a lot of her viscera flowed downhill into this area in the middle of the forest and collected there, blood and goop and ugh. And then the roots just sort of sunk into that and poisoned the grandfather tree, like right out. And so a ton of the Mormon followers moved in. Great spot. Elves were, those elves who lived ran. And those elves who came and spied on it later were freaked out and didn't even want to talk about what they saw there.
I mean, one person's rancid wasteland is another one's dream home. So,
and this is definitely the dream home of these hags who moved in. So
Snake Barbie dream home.
Yeah, originally it was 3 hags who kind of took it over. And they didn't really get along so well with each other. There's a kind of thing where, particularly with chaotic evil character trope, where there's a lot of infighting, and there was a heck of a lot of infighting. A cavern hag, a storm hag, and a moon hag, basically. I'm not going to try to say all their names. The only one that's super relevant is Lithacha. The 3 of them fought. She basically booked, and the other 2 died as a result of the fighting. And then 3 storm hags basically took over, because there's kind of a 3 coven of 3 kind of vibe. 3 storm hags took over and like, we rule it now. But they had their own little infighting, because despite being the same type of hag, they still had issues. Until this new hag shows up, calling herself the Blood Crone. And they're like, who the heck are you? You look vaguely familiar. And she's like, this is mine. And they're like, yeah, screw you, it's ours. And she vomits this thing. Her mouth opens in a way that's like impossible. She's magically huge mouth, and vomits this giant, bloody, lumpy thing. And the thing is pulsing. And they realize it is pulsing to the beat of all of their hearts. Like all of the hags and all of the followers. And they're all like, whoa! And they realize it's Mormo's heart. And then she picks it up and she shoves it back down her gullet. And she's like, I carry Mormo's heart. And they're like, yep, you're the boss now. We will follow you to the ends of hell, whatever you want. You're it. So she basically took over. and the storm hags were like, yeah, okay, fine. She created a new coven with her as the top. None of this equals shit. And she has 13 major lieutenants under her. It's like, let's have more than 2. Let's have 13, then they can really fight amongst themselves. So and there's actually descriptions of every single one of these characters in both Rust and the old book. Well, I mean the old book, and then Rust carried them over and added to them with. I don't know if they all have full stat blocks, but they at least all have references. And they consist of both mostly hags, but also a couple of other like Slytherin and Asathi, but they have to be women. That's the one qualification. Dar el-Anat means those who will find in Titan speech, and the whole conceit around them is to gather all of the bits of Mormo and put them all in one place so we can rebuild her. And that's their whole mission.
They're
and
like the people trying to put Mormo back together. Like, there are others that are like, yeah, that'd be all right, but they're like the most gung-ho about it.
And the most organized.
Yeah.
Definitely the most organized. The Crimson Temple is also like, yes, we want to bring Mormo back together. And there's a couple of smaller factions that want to bring Mormo back together, but they're the biggest faction. And they're the whole faction behind the Serpent Amphora plot, because the Amphora, which is like a urn, like a big 2-foot tall urn, had Mormo's junk in it. Not junk, but stuff. Had Mormo's viscera and goop. You're muted. And so they wanted to reclaim it, and if you do the actual whole module, there's a whole plot around the nefarious things they want to do with it and how the PCs have to stop them. And like lots of duplicity and double crossing, and there's a dragon. But the dragon in that module is amazing. But so that's like one of the pieces they want, but that they have her heart, and they have who knows what else. And they've got, I think this is the one where they have the horrible cistern, I believe. So the location is called Anat Calabath, or the Serpent Citadel, which Serpent Amphora Part 3 is called the Serpent Citadel. And there's maps of this place in both the book, the Hornsaw book, as well as the Serpent Amphora Part 3 Serpent Citadel. No surprise. The roots, as I said before, are all in this kind of muck, and there's tons of snakes that live there and just nasty stuff. Underneath, within the roots, there's these caverns, and all of the 13 hags and the blood crone have like chambers in them, and there's a map of one of those particular caverns in the Serpent Citadel module. It's just above those, in the lower branches, there's like bodies hung that are just rotting and stuff. And then there's these wicker, like little, that used to be these little nice little elven houses that elves used to live in 200 years ago, that are now got like the servants of the hags are in these little wicker huts through the trees. And then the very top are these crows and corvids that are just there and picking at the eyeballs and bits of the bodies that are hanging, and it's just horrible. Truly horrible. And in the center of the tree, there's one of those knots, what they call it, that trees have, that was hollowed out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's massive. And this tree is like, bigger than a redwood. This is a massive tree. And this chamber inside, this hollowed out chamber, used to be where the elves gathered and did happy things, and now it's just horrible. And it's where there's like a dais there, and where the blood crone would have her meetings and summon the 13 witches and do their thing. And there's always somebody, one of them's always there, not necessarily the blood crone, usually not the blood crone, honestly, but someone's always there kind of doing the thing. And in this chamber, there's this statue of Mormo, this like 30-foot tall statue of Mormo. And whenever they find a new Mormo bit, they have this big, huge ceremony where they take the bit and they go up to the statue and they just shove it down the mouth of the statue. And then it kind of drops down and it ends up in this cistern where they've got all the bits gathered. And it's just this cistern of Mormo goop.
Gook, right.
And it's just horrifying.
Mechanically separated Mormo.
Exactly. And I can't imagine just the smell.
Right? Yeah.
So, but they keep it clean and it's all magical and stuff. So, so there's that. And that's the thing. And they're trying to gather all of her bits to someday reconstruct her from that. So probably, other than maybe Kadam, this has got the most amounts of Titan yuck of anywhere in the Scarred Lands, is in this vat, in the middle of this massive tree. So that's the Darlanot. Let's see, anything in particular I can add? Did I miss anything? Or is it going to move on to the next one? I'm going to actually skip those guys and jump to the third major faction, the Torn Womb. The Torn Womb. They don't have a specific location. They're pretty much spread out. They have little clusters throughout the Hornsaw. And they're actually antithesis to the other two major factions, the Crimson Temple and the Darlanot, or the Serpent Ascendant and the Darlanot. They don't want Mormo back. They believe that the Torn Womb, meaning the gods destroyed her utterly. Yes, you finding all these bits, but you're not going to be able to reconstruct her from her. It's just viscera. It's not like it's alive. It's just stuff. It's organic stuff. We, however, gain power through that viscera. We gain strength by imbibing and ingesting it and being near it and being in this forest that she made. We want to build an empire in her name and have everyone on Skarn, or at least Gelspad, follow her ways. So they're trying to build this empire. They've got like 1,000 followers. It's not really an empire. It's probably a little bit more than that, but
I mean, every empire starts somewhere.
Somewhere,
very,
exactly.
very slowly.
Yeah,
they are impressively dangerous, but
they are insanely dangerous. They are also led by a high Gorgon, and who's just like, resurrecting. There's no point. There's just no point. And they've broken up into these little packs and do guerrilla warfare against everybody. I mean, they're basically against everybody. Like, it's just horrible.
And I actually have to wonder, so what do the ones who are trying to rebuild Mormo, if the others are eating bits of her, they want those bits. So
yeah, they do.
I can only assume as a DM, I would be like, they're vying against each other, not just one vying against the other, but they are like actively like, stop eating mom.
This is probably one of the biggest reasons why none of the powers of the Hornsaw have really risen up to go against the rest of Gelspad, is because of the infighting. And the Torn Womb is actually a good thing for the followers of the gods, because they're keeping the Darlanot from getting too powerful.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly screwing around with them. And they're not super huge, but it's like, and they also they kill the elves and everyone else just as much. They're just all around evil, horrible things. But they're badass and they're scary, and they will let in anybody. They don't have restriction. They're not like, oh, the Darlanot's like only women and hags, and the Ascendant are like, no, only, but everybody has to be led by the blah blah blah. They're like, no, whatever. You're a human. You're a Slytherin. You're a spider. We don't care. You can join us. We're groovy. But every group is led by High Gorgon, because, there's, organization. So they divide into these little packs of, like, basically adventuring party size, a little bit, maybe a couple of, like 5 to 10, 12 people. So bigger than an adventuring party, but in and around that. Just about enough to threaten an adventuring party. And each pack is led by 1 to 3 high Gorgons. So pretty good, solid encounter while you're wandering around the Hornsaw doing your thing. Oh, look. It's a pack from the Torn Womb. We're screwed. And they are just screwed up. Their phrase, once the womb is torn, never again can it harbor the mother's children. And that's their kind of thing. And they also encourage infighting between their own packs. So it's like, this is about as chaotic evil gets, guys.
Yeah.
And also, but the neat thing about
strong.
Yeah, but the neat thing about the Torn Womb is they have spies throughout all of Gelspad looking for Mormo bits. And you may be in like Fangsfall or Darrakeen or Mithril, and there's a Torn Womb spy there. In fact, there's one in Galida's court, in Verduk's court in Calastia. There's one in Hollowfaust. They're everywhere. These guys are spread out all over the place. So who knows?
They're like the anti-vigilance.
Yeah, and they're and they enlist people who can disguise themselves. So spellcasters who cast illusions, or high Gorgons who look human, or is that a wig? Gotta check. or various other species that are like mechanoid emulators who wear skins. Although they don't follow Mormos so much, but I guess they've converted them, and they're really good at converting people too, which is kind of crazy. So there's those guys. So this is kind of the three major Mormo factions. Then there's a whole ton of smaller but still terrifying minor factions. There's a location on the map between south of the Crimson Temple called Cayman's March. One of the maps, it says Marsh. It's March. That is an error. And it's where the this one faction called the Eightfold Curse hangs out. They are what are called witch spiders, which is a Scarland specific monster type. Basically, I guess it would be magical beast, magical creature. And they're very, very intelligent, powerful spellcasters. I hope they're in. If they're not in the creature collection, I hope they show up in Rust, because they're flipping super creepy and amazing. And they're another one of those, we had to figure our shit out, three, and also very gender based too. The witch spiders themselves are all female, and they mate by finding male spiders of other giant spider types, like wolf spiders or giant, I think they're just called giant spiders, those huge spider types.
Yep.
And they'll mate with them, eat them, and then lay eggs. The baby eggs have the opportunity to become witch spiders, and the male eggs go off and run off and become wolf spiders, or whatever their father was. If they're born and they're like, a spider the size of my fist in these giant nests. Terrifying. If you're afraid of spiders, this is like the worst. And they fight amongst each other. And then the ones that are the strongest, once they get up to about dog-sized, will go off and start, building their own webs and leave the nest. And eventually, when they're full witch spider sized, which I assume is like huge, think Shelob level shit, they will come back and find a older witch spider and make friends and be like, please don't kill me, I want to join. And if they're nice and they do the right thing, they take their thread and join it to the thread and become part of the whole thing. So basically, when you go into Cayman's March, it's all spider webs everywhere, pretty much impassable area. And think like the spiders stuff in The Hobbit, except I don't even want to say on steroids, because that's just too minor. Just 100-fold in terms of just the level of horror. Because these aren't like, spiders in The Hobbit were people size. These are all Shelobs all the time. There's like a bunch of them. There's three major. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I just double checked. They're not in the.
They're not in the creature collection.
The new creature collection. So the only official version of them is in the Hornsaw 3rd edition book.
Hopefully, yeah. I have no idea if they show up in Rust or not. I hope they do, because they're just so badass. I think they're just huge, not gargantuan, but still. So they're not Ogoliphant, but is that how you say it? From the Silmarillion, but they're still massive.
Ungoliant?
Ungoliant, thank you. I was mixing up my Tolkien words.
It happens.
And they have 3 leaders as well. So there's just a whole thing about that number. One kind of lives in the middle of Cayman's March and is sort of the major voice. And one is in like the western area, and another one is in this pit. in kind of the southeastern area. I think it's the southeastern. And she's just like, fuck off, you know. So, and they just look like giant spiders. They're not like driders with faces or anything like that. They just look like giant spiders. But they're giant spiders who are sorceress spellcasters and really smart. So, bleh. So, you know.
Travis was just on. He verifies that witch spider stats are included in the latest appendix update that came out for Rust.
Sweet. I didn't read the appendix update. I only read the other updates. So that's awesome. That's cool. And they're horrible. If you have spider issues, don't go to Cayman's March. Going into one of the crazy factions, aren't they all though?
Right.
There's the one that I actually have very few notes about because I didn't bother, called the Hornsaw Sentinels. Fran, would you like to tell us a little bit about the Alicorn Vale?
Yeah, so we covered this. I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but so back when this was the Broadreach, and it was a magical place full of peace and healing and pretty unicorns and trippy dancing Tolkien-esque elves who, wandered around singing "Ta-ra, ta-ra" and defending everybody from the nightmares. There were these people called the Broadreach Sentinels, whose job was to not let anything icky come in and destroy the unicorns. And they they fought alongside the unicorns, and they were brave and valiant, and they all died when Mormo hit the forest, except for one. And when I say all except for one, I mean all of them. And they died bad and ugly and messy and bloody. And one of them, who was basically off, getting some milk from the corner store at the time, came back and saw, basically, is coming running through the forest, seeing piles of dead pieces of just everything everywhere, and going, "Oh no!" Reaches the unicorn glade where the magical pretty unicorns frolicked, and all of them are dead. And he's like, "Oh no!" Except for one. I think it was one mare that was left. Basically, a pregnant mare who gave birth to this foal that basically tore its way out of her.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which was this crazy, rabid, monstrous, horse-like creature with a serrated horn and fangs. And he was just kind of like, "Oh no!" And then when he realized that it was carnivorous, and that this was all that was left of unicorn kind in the forest, a part of his brain just kind of snapped.
Yeah, and that wasn't the only one of these creatures either.
Yeah.
Because there's enough of these weird horn saws that they named the whole forest after them.
Yeah, no, it got weird and freaky, but yeah, basically he spent some time kind of, wandering around, basically just screaming incoherently. And then finally, the place that he came to was, "This is still my forest. These are still my creatures. I still have to protect them." And so he founded the Hornsaw Sentinels. And over the years, basically, he came around to a philosophy that Mormo was right. Everything's fucked. And the only thing that makes any sense is this. So he set out recruiting other people who felt similarly, and they protect the Hornsaw from anybody that will come in and try to colonize or heal the forest. They think the Broadreach elves are just knucking futz, and they're not totally sure now with all of these newcomers coming into the forest and everything, like the Hollow Legion. They haven't decided yet whether to kill all of them, but that kill all of the intruders is definitely where they lean. Their current field leader is a woman named Ordina, who's a Manticora, who was basically recruited when she came into the forest to do some hunting. And instead, Elatoran's personal Hornsaw buddy basically hunted her down and cornered her. And then Elatoran sat down and bent her brain, explaining how, this is actually the way that it's supposed to be. Nature needs to be red in tooth and claw. And she finally was like, yeah, okay, I kind of see that. They basically, they're about nature, and specifically the forest. And when they say forest, they mean the Hornsaw. And when they say forest, you can hear them capitalize it every time. They get along pretty well with the Torn Womb, because the Torn Womb is also like, yeah, this is a great place, and it should stay this way. This is the last legacy of Mormo. They have sort of a cooperation relationship with the Dar al-Anat, that, like, basically all of these people that want Mormo back are nuts, but you guys are at least less nuts about it and less fanatically awful about it. So if someone has to actually bring her back, I guess it should be you.
They're probably the only ally of the Torn Womb, honestly. And that's actually new lore, because when the old lore Torn Womb didn't have any allies. So
yeah, no, in the new lore, the Torn Womb really hate necromancers.
yeah,
and
that.
And among all the people in the forest, you've got Glividatel, which established itself, and a whole bunch.
We'll get to that in a bit.
I know, I'm getting to it, but one of the reasons that the Torn Womb and the Sentinels are so simpatico is because basically they hate those guys. Because they're here to wreck this wonderful place that we've got. Like, the one thing they vaguely agree with the Broadreach Elves on is those guys have got to go.
Yeah. And there are as I understand it, a lot of the Hornsaw Sentinels came from after the Broadreach Elves woke up from their 100-year unifying nap thing. Yeah. Some of them were kind of crazy.
Not everybody came out of that okay.
Yeah, and many of them joined the Sentinels eventually to bolster their numbers in recent years.
Yeah. So, but the Hornsaw Sentinels will take anybody. The basic difficulty is you have to be able to walk around in light clothing with a bow in the Hornsaw Forest and not be eaten. So, go ahead and try for it. But
if you succeed in that, you can get in. So, yeah, and just say that they're both loosely allied with. Actually, no, that is the new lore that says they're allied with the Torn Womb and the Dar al-Anat.
Yeah,
right.
And they're interesting in that basically everybody kind of knows that Urdana leads them, but they don't have meetings, and they don't really message each other. They just kind of do stuff, and it ends up being sort of togethery. Like, they can call meetings, but it's very rare.
And a lot of them are just rangers or druids with Hornsaw unicorn animal companions.
No,
ride them.
Hornsaw animal companions. Very much, yeah. So.
And actually there's also one of these characters make an appearance in the Serpent Citadel too. Yep. And could potentially be an ally to the party.
Yep. If you're an adventurer and you're not there to screw with the forest, and you make that clear, they may actually be on your side, especially if you're there to hunt somebody that they dislike. But
they tend to favor chaotic neutral more than chaotic evil. But chaotic they are. All right, moving on. Is that it for them?
I think so.
Then we get some weird factions. There's a new one. This is to as far as I can tell, this is new to Rust. I didn't find any references to them in any of the I did it again. $1 in the jar. Any of the Hornsaw books. The Gilded. They seem pretty cool. I love these guys.
Oh
They're
god,
new,
the,
and
the
it was
Sentinels
sort of like
hate these
we had
guys.
to do something with the dwarves. It was like, okay, there's a dwarven village in the Broadreach Horizon, but we need to do something else. And so they came up with this crazy idea, I guess. And there was this dwarf kid who was, a kid when the elves came back and saw the elves like reemerge and wake up and everything. And I guess they materialized. Were after dematerializing into the forest. I don't know how it worked, but anyway, so this dwarf kid witnessed this and was like, "Wow, that was amazing!" And was one of the elves gave them this item. They were like, "Here, kid, have a thing," and it was kind of random. And the item was this magical bracer, I think. And it has the ability to cast this really badass ritual, not even a spell, but a ritual called Denib's Fury. And it's basically take that ninth level, not quite ninth level, but like eighth level storm spell or earthquake spell, and just cast it once a day. Like as a ritual, it takes like hours to do and all this stuff. And earthquake, what's the radius on earthquake? 60 feet, 80 feet, 120 feet. This is like 600 feet. And it will do earthquake, or it will do a blizzard, or it will do a typhoon, or whatever weather vengeance thing is. So this dwarf kid is given this mega MacGuffin, but it's like, cool, I have a thing. and there were also a bard. And they kind of went nuts. So I know there's more to it, and check out Rust for the details, but they basically started this little weird cult of musicians. And they call themselves the Conductor. And she calls herself the Conductor, and she's enlisted mostly dwarves, although I assume there's some non-dwarves, I'm not sure, who are basically music people, and a couple times a year have these big concerts in the Hornsaw. Near the Broadreach, near the safer area, which pisses off the elves of the Broadreach because they're like, "We're trying to sleep. What are you doing over there?"
What's with the flashing lights? I don't understand.
So that overall wouldn't be a big deal. It's like they do Burning Man twice a year, whatever. Except
I don't want to suck on a pacifier. Get out of here with that.
Except they do this other thing which annoys the fuck out of everybody, where they have a seamstress amongst their little group who's figured out how to sew these little golden things into foliage. And the seamstress and the there's another one, the silker, who gathers the silk, and then the seamstress does the sewing. And they've got minions who help with this, and they go around the forest and they sew these little golden leaves into ferns and leaves and trees and whatever, and branches and stuff throughout the Hornsaw. As sort of a path of fairiness and magic, which was meant to be this happy, shiny thing. The problem is they're all enchanted. So some like random deer or person or whatever will encounter one of these, get exposed to it, like it'll fall on their head or brush against their leg or something, and then they get enchanted and they start singing, and they can't stop. So this is neat. I was like, this is just a crazy thing. I don't know who invented this. Like I said, it's anything for us, but it sounds just wild. There's my wacky interpretation of it. So the crazy dwarves running around making music, and that this is part of why I said Rust felt a little bit more upbeat to me.
Yeah.
Because like this is sort of a chaotic cult, but they're not a chaotic evil cult. They're not entirely good either, but they're, I wouldn't say benevolent, because they have this nasty habit of enchanting people and then sort of converting them to join their cause, and they're very convincing because they're all magic users. Like, you want to follow us? People are like, okay. And they tend to build their numbers this way, so it's interesting. Anyway, that's the Gilded. Moving on, there's
they're one of the really fun things in Rust.
Yeah, they're one of the fun things. There's the Lilandel, which is one of my faves. They're good guys. yes, there are good guys. In addition to the 30-odd Broadreach tribes, there's these guys. They're a very, very small group, though. Then this is where that I was describing before about the witness of Mormo's demise was written by the namesake of this group, the elf. Little. Am I audio now? Hello?
Huh. I can hear her.
Am I back?
Can you hear me, Jeremy?
Uh-oh. We can hear each other.
Oh.
Okay. Your mic still works. Okay, so Lilandel was the elf. I believe she was I want to say she was a bard. And fought on behalf of the elves that fought Mormo. She survived. She had basically a elite group of fighters who followed her, and she wrote of the battle, but she died soon after, and only had one. She had like a ton of kids, and she had married a half elf actually. So they had like quarter elf, quarter human, 3/4 elf, quarter human kids. and then he died because of old, and then she married an elf, and they had more kids. She had a lot of kids, particularly for an elf, which was unusual. And they most of them followed her thing, all but one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Travis was saying that Scarlands can be very grim bright, and I would say that especially in 5th edition.
Yeah.
No, actually, that was Jeremy was the one saying.
Oh, Jeremy said that.
Yeah, I was just reiterating something that Travis has said before, that Scarlands is very grim bright, where instead of grimdark, where everything is just fucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can hear us.
The world is fucked. Like, there's a lot of really messed up shit, but there's a lot of like fun things that happen, and there's a lot of hope that springs out from the world.
You can change that.
Exactly.
That's a big difference.
Like dwarves who sow golden leaves into plants and
and have raves in the forest.
Yeah.
As one does.
Okay. Anyway, going back to Lilandel. I don't know where I got cut off, so I'm gonna kind of re-summarize the beginning. So,
perfect.
She was an elf bard. Witnessed Mormo's death, which is described in the Serpent and the Fold at the beginning. 3 pages of awesome. She had this group of elite fighters, kind of like the Hornsaw Sentinels, except without the unicorns, or the Broadreach Sentinels. Witnessed Mormo's death, wrote about it, died not long after, along with her whole family, generations of which had been fighting to protect the Broadreach. The only survivor being her youngest son, who at the time was off in the Ganges, Marella, who was this kid elf, which still meant he was like 100, because elves, being all sad and mopey and emo boy in the Ganges, like, oh, my whole family's dead, and where I was born has been eaten by Mormo, and it's horrible and awful. And then this elf maiden shows up to him and is all, you've been bad. You need to go back to the Broadreach and reclaim it for your people. And he's like, who are you? What? And it turned out she was an incarnate. Incarnates are this particular folks, mostly elves, although not exclusively by any means, who remember their past lives. I love incarnates. They're a blast. I'm actually playing one in Travis's current game. And I think they're a blast. So she's over the years growing up is remembering her past lives, and so this happens quite a while because she would have had to have grown up enough to confront him, and she was his sister in her last life, which is really cool. So he's like, my sister's like back, and she's like, we have to do this for mom, and he's like, we have to do this for mom. So the two of them, and this is like actually fairly recent, this is probably 10-20 years before the current 8150, they go back to the Hornsaw, and they gather up various elves and reawakened Broadreach elves and other folks who Broadreach elves who actually did work with the Lilandels back before they took the big sleep, and they're like, yeah, we want to go back to this, and they created like another little sect organization, protectors of the forest, and they're basically elite forces, spies, scouts, trackers that go around the Hornsaw and try to protect people. Very, very loose organization, mostly followers of Tanel, bards, rangers, archers, a lot of range stuff, a lot of guerrilla tactics. And they're really almost the opposite of the Torn Womb. So, like, Torn Womb will be mucking about, making life difficult for adventurers. The Lowlandy will show up and save your asses. So, if you need the magical MacGuffin when you're like, that CR was too high, I'm gonna get a TPK. Great little tool. And they get saved by these guys. Because they could conceivably show up anywhere. And pretty cool. And in fact, this is a Reach connection, but in they do make a bit of an appearance in the Serpent Citadel, and there is a vague reference to them in the prequel chapter of Vigilant, as the Druid is one of the descendants of the line of Lowlandiel as well. So it's all in there. Kind of fun stuff there. Anyway, there's those guys. Now I'm going to skip tracks to talk about the other side of the river. So the Broadreach River runs through the middle of the Hornsaw, goes down, eventually dumps into the ocean near Shelzar. But the eastern half is mostly Mormites. The western half is mostly death. Well, both halves are mostly death, but western half, the other side of the river, is where you find the Spectre Woods. Lots and lots of undead are there. How this happened, it's really close to those negative energies around Hollowfaust and all of that bled in. And in the middle of this forest, there was this plateau, sort of rose above it, upon which, back in the days, there was a necropolis. Back in Leading Empire, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And when the side of the Immortals, a couple episodes ago, got kicked out of Hollowfaust, wander around on their second pilgrimage to find a new place to live, wandered into the Hornsaw and found this haunted forest full of undead. And they're like, we're necromancers, we can handle this. Okay, maybe not. There's a lot of undead here. We can handle a little bit of this. Run. And they got up to this plateau of like, okay, there's like a ruined building. We'll stay here. And they set up shop there. And we're like, this is good. This is actually pretty good. There's undead. We can eventually control them. And yeah, we can set up like a place here. So they basically built their own Hollowfaust in the middle of the Hornsaw in this Spectre Wood. And they called it Glividatel. Originally led by what was the guy's name? The guy who got kicked out, who was the head of the Society of Immortals. And he eventually kind of gets overthrown. It's not really clear what happened to him in this lore, but it gets taken over by a necromancer named Ketinas, who's pretty terrifying.
Was that original guy's name Eret?
Eret, yeah, thank you. Heir to Eret was Kratos, the Necrotic King. He's also in The Wise and the Wicked. And he's basically took over the Society of Immortals. Mostly rules Glividatel, but there's another major guy called Lucian Dane, the Black Messiah, who was also in The Wise and the Wicked. And he leads what's called the Obsidian
That's
Pyre.
Definitely a name he came up with himself, too.
The Black Messiah?
Oh,
hell yeah. Oh, yeah. And these are both very, very powerful necromancers. And they don't work against each other, but they do kind of give each other space. There's no map of Glividatel that I could find yet. I am absolutely expecting one to show up in Rust. I believe the next drop is going to be about Glividatel. I'm not sure, maybe. But they haven't dropped any Glividatel lore, so all my lore for this is based on the original book, or the original Hornsaw book. But it's basically they took this old necropolis and built a city out of it. And as I implied before, they brought last week's episode where I talked about them capturing people, and they had the dwarven building their weapons, and they had like a bunch of humans. They built the city over time, just sort of by their people coming in who have like visions. We're necromancers, but we're evil, or people they've sort of taken in, and probably against their will. Glividatel's an interesting city because it's open to anybody. Joe Schmo adventurers can just show up, and as long as they don't proselytize, they can hang out. It's in some ways strangely safer than Hollowfaust, since you don't have to deal with the whole, oh, you died, we get your body now. But they're evil. Unredeemably evil. And it's not a happy place by any means. And to even get there, you have to fight your way through the Specterwood, which they patrol and they claim, but they don't really control. They if you're lucky, you'll run into a Glividatel patrol. If you're wandering around the Specterwood, most of the time you'll wander into some zombies or something worse. So, and for the most part, the Mormites just leave this whole region alone because lots of undead. Although the Torn Womb did, or I believe it was, no, the Blood Crown. Was the Blood Crown did attack Glividatel. We talked about that with Lucien Dane defending it, and that's where he pretty much got his big thing. His props happened then. The city's divided into multiple districts. There's the what's it called? The civilian quarter, which is rather like the the civilian quarter of Hollowfaust, except not as nice at all. Not even close, as there's no city help infrastructure or anything like that. It's just a massive hovels and little ramshackle buildings that the random citizens who've been sort of enlisted into this city against their will are now living. I think it's like probably a mockery of Hollowfaust. Basically, if you're not a mage, you live there. Although they have this place called the Colosseum Exaltus, where the random citizens can go to be entertained. I don't know what happens inside Colosseum, but I doubt it's good. So there's that thing. The necromancers, for the most part, live under the city in the crypts and stuff that was part of the necropolis, and then the leaders like Kratos and Lucien Dane and the other bigwigs live in vast mansions that they have built on the surface, towering above the civilian quarter, and where they can be all snooty and rich guy. So again, no map. So this is based on the descriptions I got out of the book.
We found the map.
We found the map.
Thanks to
I lied.
Alain knows his stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, this was in
Campaign Set in Gelspad.
Campaign Set in Gelspad, which I
Sometimes you
should
just
have
forget the
also looked
main
at.
book because it doesn't
Sometimes
often, right? It doesn't often delve as deeply into things, and so you're
I
like
did
looking at
not
all the
read the
other
book.
sources, and so yeah, there is a map.
And I'm assuming the big circle thing is, which one's the Colosseum? I don't know if you can highlight that or not. But okay, I lied. There's totally a map, and I suck. I did a lot of research for this week's episode. So.
Tracking down all the places where the information is really difficult.
A wiki.
This here.
Oh
yeah,
my god!
Right?
Do we need to expand the wiki?
Keep telling people this.
We need more people. We need more people to participate.
More people than Fran.
Just the tie-ins of just a handful of characters who interweave through so many of these books.
True.
Who are referenced all over the place is nuts. Like how many little places. I'm gonna talk about this one character drives me nuts, and a little bit of an aside, but it's related. There's another society of necromancer lakes who are a faction of Mormos who are associated with all this madness, who are led by what looks like a lich, but who isn't a lich, who's a fae, and they were involved in the Serpent Amphora, called the Bringers of Autumn, led by Ilkustra. He's woven in so many of these books as hints and little thingies, and I completely blame. I know exactly who wrote him. It's on you, Ari. But that's just one example of like random characters who just show up everywhere, and it's like this whole thing is just so marvelously rich. I can completely continue to emphasize just how much lore. The fact that we're on episode 20 something. Okay, that's my excuse for missing the fact that there's totally a map of Glividatel. Thank you.
That their Colosseum is this one that I'm moving around my mouse on the map.
Yeah, the circle,
number
10. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we've got Glividatel. We've got there's another fun little faction outside Glividatel associated with them called the Serpent Skull Heresy, led by the Lich Xanathia. I don't know. She's a high Gorgon Lich.
I don't have the text in front of me, so I'm going to
She's
trust you.
in both Rust and the old lore. The Rust says she's obsessed with understanding her mortality, and she has about 20 followers. The old lore expands on this a bit more. Her followers are unique Mormites and wacky. And they have like a little place right outside Glividatel or within Glividatel. They're hidden in the city somewhere. And her goal and her tiny cabal is to bring Mormo back. Yes, totally behind that idea. Love it. But as an undead. Because that's the only way it's possible, right?
All right.
So they want to bring him back an undead snake Mormo thing. And she has plans. So many plans.
Oh, the ideas that lesser immortals have.
Yes. And the craziest part is she doesn't know how she became a lich. She doesn't know where or even what her phylactery is.
Huh. That is awkward when you just wake up one day and you're like, did I put my soul somewhere?
Exactly. She has no memories of becoming a lich. So she's like, where's my soul? And so another thing she's having her followers do is try to find her phylactery so she can keep it safe. So that's interesting. So she's a fun little NPC that shows up in Rust as well. And like I said, her faction's pretty small, but neat little cult there.
Yeah.
And associated with Glividatel. Then those are all of the what I would call the major and moderate factions.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's just this pile of weird shit. like
Wait, the Serpent Skull Heresy doesn't count as like we want to bring Mormo back, just not all the way.
Well, they were in Rust, so that's why I brought them up. But that they're not minor.
Well, no, that when you say then there's this pile of weird shit, I'm like,
yeah, they kind of belong in the pile. Well, they were good transition to the pile of weird shit. So most of the weird shit is based on locations. There's a group of about a dozen high Gorgons and a whole mess of disease Slytherin called the Plague Eye. Plague Eye, not Plague Eye. Plague Eye. They have their own crazy cult idea, and they're actually spread between the Hornsaw and the Morning Marshes. As several high Gorgons went to the Morning Marshes with idea, shared it with Disease Slytherin, and the Disease Slytherin were like, "That's a great idea." And then some of the Disease Slytherin went back to the Hornsaw with them, and some of the high Gorgons stayed in the marshes. So thus you can have high Gorgons show up in the marshes, and you can have Disease Slytherin show up in the Hornsaw. And this cult of maybe 350 wackadoos want to bring Mormo back, want to bring Churn back as a gestalt. And they're gathering pieces of both Mormo and Churn with the idea of mushing them together to create a new Titan. So there's that cult.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong, indeed?
Everything. The answer is everything can go wrong.
They're led by Mizanoth, yet another crazy high. Most of these high Gorgons sound pretty nuts in my book. I want somebody to play one as a PC who's insane and who's like, all of my brethren are insane. I'm not.
I had to get out of there. My family's crazy. Yeah. I mean, I have snakes in my stomach, and I think they're crazy. So
exactly. So there's those guys. So they don't have a specific location. Then there's a bunch of just random. Oh yeah, there's one picture of that. Then there's a bunch of random locations. There's Baneth's Hold. This is a bunch of Ophidian. That's the term. Ophidian. Ophidian Guild.
Yeah, Ophidian.
Ophidian Guild. A group of adventurers who kind of went crazy after venturing in the Hornsaw.
Weird.
And they don't want Mormo resurrected because they see her as a source of power. Kind of like the Torn Womb. And they're basically just a bunch of adventuring types from all over Gelspad who've gathered here and formed this kind of guild who adventure in the Hornsaw for their own weird-ass purposes. So conceivably adventuring party could be part of that guild if you want to play like evil or mad adventurers. There's elves, druids, rangers, rogues, ladies of serpents, the whole mess. So that's kind of an interesting group. There's two of the Broadreach elf tribe, and I didn't go into details about the Broadreach elf clans because there's like 30 of them. Pick up Rust, you can I don't know all about them. But two of them, the Scorpion and Wolverine clans, intentionally are migratory clans. Like most of the other clans have villages in the northern Broadreach Horizon part of the forest, the relatively safe part of the forest. These two clans actually intentionally nomad their way around the forest, making like safe pockets as they go through and just sort of beating back the beasties a bit as much as they can. They avoid the major Cabal locations. You're not going to find them near the Crimson Temple or Kalim and the Both, the Dar Elanat headquarters, and they don't go in the Spectrewood, but they do wander around pretty much everywhere else. And they take opposite routes around the forest to meet twice a year in the Border Wood, which is the southern safe-ish part of the forest, and do what they and have like this meet this moot twice a year where they get together and I guess throw a little party. Also
more
in the border
raves in the forest.
More raves in the forest. Yeah, they're elves. Man, there's always going to be something. I call it the wood moot. Also in the Border Wood, there is a handful of maybe 150 odd, exact number, not clear, homesteaders and hermits and little tiny groups of people. Nothing as so much as a village or a hamlet sized, but just little tiny groups of people to sort of live there. Not Mormites, not per se, not necessarily evil, just like there's like 3 halflings living in this cave because it's safe, kind of stuff.
We came here to get away, and this is about as away as you can get.
So, because the Border Wood is thinner, it doesn't have the thickness of the major part of the Hornsaw, and it's where the steppe country of the northern heteronomy meets the Hornsaw. So it's a thinner forest. It's kind of hard. It's like, am I still in the heteronomy or am I in the Hornsaw? I'm not sure. So that's kind of where they are. And it's interesting. A lot of refugees from Calastia, maybe political refugees from Calastia, have fled here to live, including 2 Calastian nobility families called the Serpentine and the Slith, which makes you go, Could they possibly be allied with some of the Mormite groups? With names like that? Who knows? But as a result, you can also run into Verduk's forces in this region as he's sent his military troops to go looking for these people.
Yeah.
Or whatever other interests the Calastian army may have. So that's happening there.
So, just a question from Alon in chat: is this where the poisoner lives from The Wise and the Wicked?
I don't know.
He can't.
What's
He doesn't
their
remember
name?
her name.
That sounds right.
Tree Snake? Because I was literally about to mention that.
Could be.
Could be.
I'm looking it up. Keep
you
going.
Look it up while I go on. I'll skip that then. There's a place called the Black Grove. I don't know if it's on your map or not.
Lily Weed Spawn.
Oh, Lily Weed Spawn. No, I don't believe she's in the Hornsaw. I think she's in the actual in the heteronomy or the hegemony somewhere else. I get those two words mixed up a lot. I think she's in the Calastian, in Calastia proper somewhere. Not necessarily the country of Calastia, but in one of those things. I don't think she's in the. But I would not be surprised if that's where she gets her poisons from, because we didn't go into the flora and fauna in detail. There's a lot. But I will say that the Hornsaw is the home, other than maybe the Blood Rain Woods and Soap Opera Swamp. Soap Opera Swamp, yes.
Scorporatra Swamp.
Thank you, love, for being able to pronounce things. But vast majority of poisons that you can acquire in Gelspad or in the Scarlands themselves, you'd get from the Hornsaw, as most of the plants at least in the heart of the forest are deadly. Other than pretty much in the Broadreach Horizon or the Borderwood, anywhere else, everything's poison. Everything's trying to kill you. Be it a bunny rabbit or a flower, it is trying to kill you. And everything is vicious and poisonous and nasty. So she would definitely be getting her ingredients from there. But she's going to find more of those, I think, in the heart of the forest than in the Borderwood.
So the feeling that I get from Wise and the Wicked, the 5th edition update, is that so she lives on her father's little fortified farm, and I feel like it says it's about a day outside of. Let me make sure I read that right.
This is probably near there.
Yeah, it's just outside of the Hornsaw, but I feel like it's between the Calastian hegemony and the Hornsaw. So it's probably in the area that you're talking about, but just outside the forest.
Just
on the edge.
Yeah, because I thought she was in the somewhere in the journey, but unquestionably that's where she would get her ingredients, because there's okay. There's I already touched on the river that runs through the Broadreach River. It's within the Hornsaw itself. It's sort of split into two sections. The upper section, which is between the Hornsaw and the Gascar peaks, flows between Glividatel and the heart of the forest, basically. Very, very dangerous. But none of the Titan spawn creatures themselves have really established themselves along its sides, along the river. And that is mostly because of one of the other elf clans called Clan Lizard. And they're one of the crazier clans. And they patrol the river. And they have boats and stuff, and they'll actually go up and down the river. And so the northern part of the river is in the middle of dangerous country, but not as a river super dangerous itself. The the southern half within the Hornsaw is much more dangerous, because there's rockies, there's rapids. There's rocks and rapids.
You know, the little rockies that stick up out of the water that you don't want to hit? They're the no-hitties with your boatie.
Well, what's crazy, though, is they're hard to no-hitty, because somebody, whether it was like a Mormite or nature, has cast all these illusions over them. So think like illusionary terrain, except permanent and all little pockets all over the place. So you're going in your raft down the thing, and suddenly, boof, you hit rapids and rocks, but you can't see them because they're hidden underneath the illusion of it's crystal clear water here. So that sucks.
Yeah.
So the lizard clan, nowhere to look. If you're not part of the lizard clan, you're pretty screwed when you go through that region, unless you got true sight or something.
And you know that like some of them are just like standing off on the shore with their camera. They're just like, watch this.
Yeah, pretty much. They're kind of crazy elves. So there's that. And also the lizard's kind of crazy, so they're really a danger of themselves. So don't piss them off. There's also like these serpent holes all over the place where just snakes gather. There's a specific one called the Vale of Serpents, which is a valley between down by Glividatel. It's ruled by a massive hollow naga. So naga, classic D&D monster, snake body, I think of woman head. Hollow naga are like Scarredland's fucked up naga. And there's also another one, I can't remember what they're called, but they're two-headed naga. I think they're a Scarredland's type of naga too, I'm not sure. Or maybe they're the hollow naga. Anyway, there's messed up, get more messed up snakes because we don't have enough messed up snakes, so here's some more messed up snakes. So that's a nice place of awful that adventuring parties can go. And there's also the Vale of Sorrows, right next to on the other side of the river. Don't go there. Well, don't go to any of these places, really, except maybe the Broadreach Horizon. The Vale of Sorrows, there's this whole kind of vagueness. The Viridian Province is mentioned once again, Elaine. Sorry about that. This was like a haunted area because something bad happened here in the days of the Leading Empire. Vague what it was. But when Mormo died, this was all pretty much downhill of that. So so during the battle, we've got gods and a titan and two titans flashing about and knocking down trees and throwing rocks at each other and all of this stuff. And this area was sort of downhill of all of that. So while Mormo's viscera went toward the big tree in the middle, a lot of those trees and rocks, because of where some of the battle took place, went this way. So imagine just a landslide of broken trees and boulders come crashing into this region very violently. And also, there were a bunch of the wounded, like one of those little hospitals I'd mentioned before, was here.
Of course.
And all these trees and rocks came crashing down, killing all of those poor wounded people. So it was bad. So now this place was basically haunted because of, like, it already had this kind of vibe from the past, and now you've got this present or, war era thing. And so all this energy kind of collected, and out of which rose a new rack dragon, because we needed one. So this wasn't even one of the rack dragons created by a titan specifically to fight in the Divine War. This rack dragon calls themselves the Scourge of Lyria, because this was in Lyria, so apparently he somehow got memories of it or something. I don't know, but anyway, he calls himself that, and was born here, and this is where his lair is. So if you want the heroicness of fighting a rack dragon, go here. Otherwise, avoid it.
Combined with the danger of random encounters that can overwhelm your average party while you're just sitting in camp talking about fighting a rack dragon.
Exactly. Another creepy thing in this same area right there is also the Toll Man. I love this guy. So right on the edge of the wood, to get across, if you want to cross the river here. Although why you'd want to cross the river to go to the Vale of Sorrows, I don't know. But maybe you're leaving the Vale of Sorrows to get back. There is a crossing, and there's basically a ferry boat. Or if you're coming down the river, because there's actually crazy traders who will use the broad reach. Maybe they're allied with the Lizard Clan, I don't know, and travel from the Gleaming Valley or the Kurdet or whatever. Kurdet. This area anyway will take the river from the Stricken Forest through the Hornsaw, because it's easier to travel by river in theory. If you want the most dangerous route ever. And as they reach the edge of the Hornsaw and start entering the heteronomy of Verduk, they encounter this dude called the Tollman, and he charges them to cross. People, just generally random people, he'll be like, 2 gold, please. Traders with goods or adventuring party with loot, he will be like, 10%, please. And if you don't pay him, well, the skeletons that are under the riverbanks will rise up and try to eat you, including a huge, horrible beastie, Hydra skeleton. So multi-headed skeleton monster. Probably the same Hydra that I forgot to mention that those witch spiders ganged up to kill. Why the witch spiders allied was to take out a Hydra. Could be the same guy that this guy, who's a Crypt Lord, by the way, turned into a skeleton. So he's just this Crypt Lord from Glividatel who's like, I'm going to set up shop here and make money.
Yeah.
By basically making life difficult for everybody who comes through this area.
It's a really good lesson of, if you kill something that's horrid, really in the Scarred Lands at all, but especially in the Hornsaw, dispose of it. Don't leave its useful bits laying around, because some fucking necromancer out there is going to raise it and make everyone else's life hell.
Yeah. So if you don't pay him the 10% of the treasure that you acquired from actually defeating that Rack Dragon, from going through his horde, you're gonna have to fight a Hydra skeleton as you're licking your wounds. So there's that. Be prepared. And I would totally spoil things for players. So it's like, okay, I know what my GM's gonna throw at me.
Bring extra money. Gotcha. Okay.
So those are kind of the major. There's another dozen random things of you've got all the various villages and all the various elf clans and the dwarf and tons and tons of stuff. But that's, I'd say, the bulk of the biggie things in the Hornsaw, most of which show up in Rust in one way or another. Rust's plot obviously interweaves through all of this, and it doesn't touch everything, but there's so much here. You could be adventuring in this for multiple campaigns. There's just so much material here.
You could do a whole campaign just in the Hornsaw easily.
Yeah,
Easily, absolutely. You don't even go live at Glividatel, although you might go there just be like, we need to go shopping. I know it's a crazy, scary city, but they have shops. Just don't go to the temples, because the only god here they worship is Tassel.
I know it's slave labor, but the handbags are so cheap.
Exactly.
I guess. So, very important question about Glividatel. I'm assuming they don't have the Hollowfast hats there. It's probably a style that probably they didn't bring with them.
They might have. I don't know. I mean, it's not as hot because you get the tree cover, and a lot of why they wear those hats is to keep the sun off, because it's so hot down on the edge of the desert. It's not as hot in the Hornsaw. It's all of the between the ghosts and the spider webs and the tropical jungle snakes who are trying to bite you all the time. Right. There you go. So this is probably, I would say, the worst place to be in Gelsbad. In Scar is probably this forest. It's arguably. Are the blood steps worse? They're right nearby. It's just the region of yuck. So, right in the middle, which is why this part and this part and this part are very separated from each other, because you've got this hell section in the middle, which makes life very difficult.
I do feel like this art from the 3rd edition book really sums up a day in the life of being in the Hornsaw, where you just run from everything. It's just this guy running from a, flesh-eating unicorn. Just maybe don't go there unless you are capable. And I'm really curious to see if you haven't tuned in to see Scarred Lands, a Family Affair on Travis Legg's channel, Plastic Age Plays. We're heading in this direction, and I feel like if we veer in the wrong direction, this image on your screen is going to be us.
I mean, we're just gonna we're planning to get to Hollowfest, but it still means kind of hugging the Borderwood region.
And knowing Travis, we're gonna get something is gonna come out of there, or we're gonna get veered off that direction.
I just don't want to go anywhere near this toll man fucker.
Yeah.
I want to cross the river way further south than that, because we're what, 4th level?
Yeah.
Maybe just to make sure we have enough gold to pay the fare, because this sounds bad.
Yeah.
We'll just sneak in through.
It's tough for Travis to run this because we know so much of the lore. He's just gonna have to constantly make up new shit.
No, we just have to play ignorant, which I'm very good at.
I'm very bad at.
I do have a hard time every once in a while not going, oh!
Yeah, we'll constantly at a look of our as players' faces going, I know what that is.
As a player, oh dear God, I want to turn and run. As a character, I put my hand in the box.
Well, yeah. The last session there was like a little kid, and it was a haggling, and of course Sarah, the player, was like, "It's a haggling. I know it's a haggling.
Right.
It's a kid alone who's bleeding. It's a haggling." But I'm just like, I will heal the child because of course Triss, my character, has no idea. And she's,
happens.
Somewhat nice and would do that for a poor innocent child, and who then bites her hand off. That's an example of the horror that is the Scarred Lands. Okay, the next time we're going to be doing the Gleaming Valley.
Awesome.
But Fran will be with us again because she wrote she wrote a big section of the city.
Yeah.
In the Gleaming Valley, the Gleaming City. Is it Gleaming City? Is it really called
Golden City?
A Golden City. Okay, see, that's why you're here to correct me. And on the Sunday after that, we'll be running, as I said earlier, we'll be running a live stream Twitch session of that takes place in that city. So we'll be talking about that one.
Yep.
Back, Russ.
Fun
Okay, so
times.
has Russ done better since I checked last? I think we got at least one more backer.
Nice.
Looks like the number's gone up by $50 or so.
Let me
Ish.
throw
In the right
their
direction.
link up if you haven't backed already. Go back the Dead Man's Rust Kickstarter for a mega campaign set in. It's in the Scarred Lands, but it's mostly in the Hornsaw and Gleaming Valley.
Yep.
And it relies heavily upon the new player race, the Hollow Legionnaires.
Yep.
So go check that out. It's going to be a hoot. And even though it's you may balk, you may figure 2023 is a long time away to get a printed book, but it will probably be here before then. They are putting it out there at that date because of things like this little COVID thing. I don't know if you've heard about that. A lot of things have been delayed because of that. So they just want to put a realistic you're going to get this by this date, no later, rather than saying, oh, we think we'll be able to get it to you by then, and then have that fail. But in the meantime, you're going to get previews. You're going to get the PDF before that. It's going to be good.
Yeah, the previews are coming out now. The previews will be all out by the end of the Kickstarter, which is all the written material. It's not 100% of what's going in the book, but it's probably like 85%.
Yeah,
of what's
it's a
going
good
in the
chunk.
book.
Yeah.
And not minus art and maps. And then and editing, yeah. As I was just like, I found a typo, and Travis is like, yeah, of course you found a typo. There's like probably 500 typos. It hasn't been edited yet. I was like, oh, okay. So don't be too critical of the pre stuff. It has not been edited yet. But they're supposed to do the edited, shiny arty PDF would be out in like a few months, 6 months maybe. And if we get to 22K, we get to have another gazetteer for Deirdre, which we talked about like months ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is the city of the quote dark elves who aren't dark anymore.
True.
In the dark elves.
The in the dark elves, exactly. The underground elves.
Yeah, so that'll be awesome, and I really look forward to that. And yeah, we can talk about more next time.
Nice.
So,
well, let's do our outro introductions. Let's start with Fran, our guest for the week.
Hi, I'm Fran Stewart. As you may have heard, I helped write some of Rust along with a team of other fantastic people. I also co-wrote Vigilant Through Shadows and Dreams, a Scarred Lands novel with my wife Sarah, who's a regular feature on this show. And I've written various other things too. You can find my stuff under Francis Stewart on DriveThru and most other places. And you can find me on Twitter at RonaldandValor. Come up and say hi.
Awesome. And Sarah, tell us all about you.
I'm Sarah Stewart. I'm the brains behind Vigilant, although Fran is the pretty behind Vigilant. In terms of writing. And have a bunch of other titles on DriveThru RPG for the Scarred Lands because I love this world so much. And you can find me at More Like This 2 on Twitter, which I'm trying to check with some level of regularity. And our website is morelikethisindustries.com, where we're basically, if you just want to find links to all our crap, you can go there. It's like, I was like, here's links to our stuff. Yeah, that's the bulk of our stuff.
Nice.
So I love the Scarred Lands.
Yay. And I'm Jeremy Hochhalter. I host stuff here on Twitch at WH Publications. You can find me on Twitter at WH Pubs and on Facebook at WH Publications. You can head over to WHPublications.com essentially to do the same thing. See links to everything that I have. Everyone here worked at least somewhat on something on the Frostlands of Fenric. So even though Dead Man's Rust is the big news right now, Frostlands is also big news because not only can you go and buy it and support us, but you can then turn around and publish your own stuff based on the frozen continent set in the Scarred Lands, way to the northwest of Galspad, on the Solution Vault. So go pick that up. Print or make your own stuff, publish it, and then send us links so that we can share that because that would be amazing.
Yeah, and and late news, but on January 9th and 10th, or 8th and 10th, 8th and 9th, anyway, whatever that weekend is in January, OrcaCon, which is a local convention for We Live, it will be doing a virtual convention those 2 days, and it's going to be like a 24-hour thing, so people who are not in the US can still partake.
Nice.
As basically from Friday morning Pacific time until Sunday early evening Pacific time, there's going to be a 24-hour game going on.
Nice.
So all over the world can join us. And I'm going to be running, or Fran and I, actually, one of us, probably me, running 2 games for that convention, as well as just a ton of other RPG titles and board games and a bunch of just virtual hanging out because, so I'm plugging OrcaCon now too.
Yeah. So that's January 8th through the 10th.
8th to the 10th. Yeah. So I will obviously be talking about that way more when we do. When we
and we'll have links to all that. Are tickets available now? As far as
tickets available, and it's $2.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead in the show notes on YouTube. I will throw that up there so people can go and get signed up. Yeah. Don't miss your seats
for the convention. Once you've signed up for the convention, most of the games are free.
Nice.
Unless there's a material cost.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. It was fun, and we will see you next week when we delve into the Hollow Legionnaires, the Hollow Knights, the Golden City, everything Gleaming Valley, also part of Dead Man's Rust. Go back to Kickstarter. Woo! Also, actually, before we quit, during the during the stream today, Onyx Path actually sent out an update on Kickstarter that was talking about this show. So I want to say thanks to Onyx Path and the Kickstarter for putting that out there, for sharing the lore with the masses. We appreciate it. So we will see you next time. Everybody take care. Bye.
Bye.